Welcome back to my inner anchor, guys. I'm glad you're here. Thank you for coming back and joining me once again. Today's episode is about something I think that most of us, I would in fact almost guarantee it, something that all of us experienced at some point. Today we'll be talking about when life feels loud. Not just noisy around you, but loud inside. Loud in your body, loud in your emotions, loud in the way everything starts to feel that a bit too much. That sort of overwhelming feeling that we all get sometimes. Sometimes nothing dramatic has even happened. Sometimes nothing has gone back particularly wrong. And yet inside it can feel crowded, heavy, overstimulating, hard to hold. And you can get quite claustrophobic with it. I certainly had that feeling myself. And it's where things that sometimes just get so overwhelming. And sometimes you can account for it. And sometimes you can't. That's the feeling with feelings. When you can't account for it, it doesn't mean that the feeling is wrong. It doesn't mean that you're wrong in how you feel. It just doesn't mean that you can't quite pinpoint on it what might have caused it, what might have triggered it, why you might be responding in this way. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. I think we're going to explore why life can feel loud, what that loudness is really trying to tell us, how to find your way back to the steadiness, find that still point again, back to your inner anchor when everything feels way too much. Before we move forward fully, I do want to touch on a few things because I've had a lot of contact since the first two episodes got released. So thank you so much to everyone for their support. I'm glad you guys are finding this a helpful space for you. I personally find it helpful to be able to talk these days about my experiences and the grounding techniques and practices and language that I use is purely my own experience, and it's purely I said before, this is a human space. It's not a counselling space or a therapy space. I'd love to one day make it so. That's why I've started to study a grounding foundation course with still counselling fundamentals and stuff, but it's doing that is more of a way to try. I did it as a way to understand me and my feelings and do a lot of work on myself. That's how I felt best to do it. But I wanted to explain that when I talk about the still point and your inner anchor again, it doesn't have to be. I'm not the most zen person in the world. By any means, I'm not sitting here doing this in long flowing pajamas or skipping through fields. I don't think anyone really does. I think that can be a false representation. Some people have achieved that kind of enlightenment, for want of a better expression, and hats off to them, all the best to it. But that's not what this is about. It's not what the inner anchor is about. It's not about remaining calm at all times. It's about returning to it and not letting it spoil your day. And some of the still points that people have told me that they have, I've had a few conversations where people have said, "Oh, I don't have a still point," because they think the still point, or they might think, I shouldn't say how people feel, but they may feel that the still point was represented by something calm and something balanced. But for some people, it's not. One of my still points is going to the gym and, getting on the punch bag, or when I did martial arts previously, sparring was a still point to me, and that's obviously not a calm thing. You're in the moment, but it brings you back to self. And as I said at the end of the last podcast on episode 2, there are a million ways that you can return to self. Some of them might be calm. Like I say, some of my ways are meditation, they're journaling, but equally some of them aren't. Some of them are, like I say, hitting the pads at a gym session, heavy training. Sometimes I've just gone into a field and screamed about what I needed to scream about, and just to get that emotion out so that I could have clarity. And that sounds absolutely crazy, but I'm sure I'm not the only one who's just yelled. Sometimes we yell at the wrong people, and it's not that we're yelling at them. We just want a physicality and a physical way of getting out that emotion. So sometimes, as much as it might seem a little silly, having a good scream at something in an empty room, sometimes good. Any way you can release that tension. We'll be doing an episode a little later on about emotions and anger, because I don't think they're necessarily bad emotions. It's all about how you utilise it. But I just wanted to sort of maintain that ethos throughout all the episodes, that, The still point doesn't have to be calm. It's whatever returns you to that self, whatever brings you back into your body, and to that place of you at your core. I've had people say that the only time they feel inside their bodies is when they're playing football or they're playing rugby, or like myself, going to the gym, or going for a run, or sometimes when they're scared and they'll force themselves into a scary situation, because it brings them back to self. And a friend of mine was talking about how they escape, and he didn't think that he hadn't got a still point, but he absolutely had. And I just want to make that a little more clarity. Anyway, we're going to go back to episode 3 now, today's episode, and talking about life when life feels loud. And when I talk about life feeling loud, like I say, I'm not talking about external noise. I'm talking about internal noise. That kind that lives in your thoughts. It's in your nervous system. It's in your emotion. It's in your whole being sometimes. And it can feel strangulating. It can feel claustrophobic, in the kind of constant sense that there's too much going on inside you. And it can feel completely overwhelming. Sometimes life can feel loud in the quietest of places. You can be sitting alone with no distraction around or anyone else around you and still feel completely overwhelmed. I felt like that a lot when I was dealing with things, and I know I'm not the only one. It's not all about what's happening around you when I talk about loudness. Sometimes it's about what's happening within you. I think we've all been in those situations, where you're having a conversation with someone and they're talking to you and you're not present. You're just not there. Not out of disrespect or disinterest or not wanting to be, but because there is so much going on in your head that it's really hard to be present in that moment when your mind is rushing around so much with what's going on internally. And I think everyone's expressed that at some point in their lives. I think that's fair to say. I certainly have, and I know friends definitely have, and I know my wife has when we've had conversations. When the mind is racing, when you're trying to rest, it's the body holding tension you didn't notice was there, and sometimes that comes out in physical ways. Motion building in the background with nowhere to go, and that no pressure release valve about it. There's nowhere for it to escape and to disparate into. It's feeling stretched so thin without knowing exactly why, to the point where someone asks you one simple task and it's just too much to comprehend. And it, like I say, it doesn't always happen at once. I know I've talked about previously on the podcast with my own ways of communicating and my own experiences. I've spoken about the main trauma that's happened in my life, or there's been others which I will talk about when we get to those, was like losing my dad. But sometimes that loudness doesn't happen at once, and sometimes it is, sometimes it's a big thing that's happened, that calculates such a huge trauma response. But sometimes it's tiny things and they all build up. There's I don't know. Okay, for example, let's say you have an argument with a family member and you think, well, that'll tide itself over, and then something goes wrong with the car, and then something else breaks down and you need to sort that out, and it's getting towards the end, and it just builds one responsibility, one pressure, one unspoken feeling, things being unsaid. And I'm not saying go out into the person who's done made you feel not at your most finest hour now and address it, but address them at the time, because we all know what it's like. We've all done it, where you may not feel like it's the right thing to do to address certain situations and to address certain parts of those situations, so you leave it, but it builds up, and it builds up to a point where every communication or interaction with a particular individual or a particular group already feels like a fight before it's even started. And that as well can be with someone else, but you can also build that up internally, and it can be all different things, building up that pressure because you haven't, not that you haven't been honest, it's that you haven't let it go. And it builds up and the noise just gets louder and louder, and it's another thing to worry about. And maybe you've got a lot going on. There's a lot going on in the world right now to sort of get loud about, with the cost of living going up and fuel prices going up, food's going up, and that impacts everything. And then suddenly people's wages don't stretch as far as they like, and then they've got this bill that they didn't think about coming in, or something happens and they've got to think about that. There's a lot going on, and there's a lot of pressure, and then that causes arguments because people are frustrated, and then that can lead to a breakdown in communication, and then suddenly you're not talking to the people that maybe you should be talking to, and then that can feel like a huge pressure as well, until one day everything feels louder than it should. You're spinning too many plates, you don't know which way to turn. As I say, there's definitely been moments in my own life where everything felt loud. And not because of the one big thing, like in my case, the biggest thing in my life has been dealing with grief. And I'm going to do an episode purely on grief because I think it's important. And not because of that thing, but because I was already full. I've had moments in life where, like I was saying the previous episode, because of my grief, so it does come into it, because that's part of my story. It's not necessarily the same for everyone, but I distracted myself with a lot of things so that I didn't have to deal with the fact that my dad had died. So I set up Just Push Play. I was doing a radio show. I was going to the gym. I was working at another festival. I take on this for other people. I'm trying to sort out other people's event. And suddenly, you don't know where you are. And if you just get one slight thing go wrong in the plate spinning scenario, so to speak, suddenly there's a lot of pressure to keep everything going. For example, let's say a band pulls out of the festival. The radio show needs pre-recording this week because of technical issues in the studio, and suddenly you don't know where you're going to do that. And while you're focusing on those two things, that you're getting asked to do other jobs for another event that you're involved in, or you have to do this personal task, or you've been putting on a training course work, and suddenly what you've planned to do doesn't work in reality because you've got too much going on and you're spread too thin. And also the noise and the loudness of everything that needs dealing with comes up. And even when you're alone and you're trying to sort it out, all you've got is that noise, that build up, that overwhelm. You haven't got that headspace to deal with it. And sometimes it's not even that. Sometimes it was just a lot of little worries that built up for me. Previously, you're thinking, what do I want out of life? Where do I want to be? How do I want to work? Do I want this out of my career? Do I want to change careers? What if I did this? What if I got this? What if I went down this route? What if I tried doing that? There's a lot of internal stuff that goes on. With certain friends I've spoken about it with, and on the outside, I looked okay, and everybody, because that's my mask, is the laugher, the joker, the clown of the group. That's the role I've always played. And even when my dad died, I did it. And you function and you get on with things. And I showed up in the ways that people expected me to be. But that's very different to showing up authentically. And that's where the loudness comes from. Because when you show up not authentically, and that's not necessarily you're doing it out of a bad way, sometimes you're doing it because you feel that's what is expected of you. And sometimes that is, if people are honest, what they do expect you to be. but we can't be everything for everyone all of the time. That doesn't work. So people assumed I was okay for a very long time, and I'm pretty good at masking it. I think we all are. We've all had those conversations, and someone went, "Oh, I didn't know you felt like that." You're like, "Well, yeah, because I didn't say it." We as human beings are very deceptive in that we can put on an emotional front that's not true. And sometimes we're doing it for a bit of support to ourselves, fake it till you make it, right? And sometimes you're doing it for others because you don't want them to feel bad or to feel awkward around you. Sometimes you're doing it for yourself, like I say, as a mask. And sometimes you're doing it because you just don't know what else to do. I've been doing a lot of work internally for the last 2 years. And it's only in this last couple of months that it's really started to click into place. I was doing a lot and following some various practices that I've spoken about that I didn't know what the end goal was necessarily. I knew I just had to do it and try something different. But at the time, I was very different inside. I felt tense, I felt restless, I felt disconnected. I felt that I wasn't living a life I wanted. Not in the sense of feeling like I wanted to not be here, just in a sense of my life as it looked with what I was doing with it. I wasn't even sure that's what I wanted out of it. I wasn't sure how I got there. But looking back, I know how I got there, and I got there through survival. And becoming something and someone else, because I didn't let that 22-year-old who lost his dad do what he needed to do. And I also felt like I was sometimes carrying more than I had space for, because I was taking on other people's problems, because we're humans, we want to help. But for a long time I felt like I had to fix everything, because I think for me it was a case, and this isn't going to be, whatever I term the same here, this is not a one-fits-all rule book, I'm just talking about my experiences here, and as the podcast develops I will get some guests on to talk about their experiences, but I can only talk from mine. I felt like, because I didn't know how to fix what was going on with me, I didn't believe I could, and in some ways I couldn't, because I couldn't make my dad come back from the dead. I couldn't stop him dying. I was completely helpless when he was ill. And since that, there's been a lot going on in my life. My mum has battled cancer for the best part of 2 years. Thankfully now she's, in what they call a partial remission, which is the best it's ever been. Her other half, Sean, has been diagnosed with terminal stomach cancer. My brother-in-law passed away. Ian. He passed away a couple of years ago. And then you've got, the general stresses of life and seeing loved ones, like people in your family that you love dearly, going through some horrendous stuff. Like, watching my sister-in-law and my nieces and nephews grow up and have to live and navigate that. And they were amazing. They were so great in and that made me think that I didn't carry myself the way they'd have done. And I know they've had their tears, and I know they've had their dark moments, and I know they've had their moments of sheer despair. But they spoke about it constantly. It was never a closed topic of conversation. There was no front. There was nothing but honesty about how they were feeling, when they were feeling, and why they were feeling it. And I can't tell you how proud I am to know those people. This is a family I've married into, and I'm very lucky to have them in my life. And I've learned a lot from them, and they mean a lot more to me than they might realise. And that did lead to a period where times were loud, because I naturally wanted to help however I could, whether that be silly things, just being the uncle trying to make the kids laugh, or, helping with maths homework for one of them, or going for a kickabout with another, or whatever it might be. But equally, I had my own feelings about my brother-in-law passing away, and I wasn't in the nucleus, so to speak. The nucleus was my sister-in-law and the kids, and then we were all around trying to support her. And at the same time, my mum's going through chemo, and that's going on. And you're in those scenarios again where there's another family member with cancer. So that brought up a lot of stuff from my dad that I thought I'd dealt with, but I hadn't. And there was just a lot going on internally that made me not present in other ways. I wasn't present in my friendships. I wasn't present in my relationships. I wasn't present in work. Because it goes back to what I was saying before, when everything is so overwhelming and has so much going on in your head, your brain and mind focuses on that, and you can't get out of it sometimes. Like everyone else, when they've been in, everything hits the fan. I'd wake up already on edge, already in my head something was going to go wrong that day, already feeling that I was on the back foot before I'd even stepped into the day. And the weird thing is, when you live like that for long enough, and like I say, it took me a long time to start tackling things, you can start to feel that's just the way life is. You don't always realise how overwhelmed you are, or you just think you need to try harder, push more, keep going, fight this, fight that, get that sorted, and eventually something asks for your attention. For me, it was a feeling like I couldn't hear myself anymore. There was so much going on around me, so much inside of me, that I lost that still point, that quiet point, that true Lee. I lost him years ago. And I just kept busy. I just kept going. And when, as I mentioned in a previous episode when I was talking about a story, when Joe asked me the second time, was I okay? And it all poured out of me. I thought, oh, okay. And I'd had a few moments like that before. But that's when I started to address the noise. I started to talk about it. And talking doesn't fix everything, but it can help. And it's not the only tool you should use. Sometimes it's a combination of tools. And then when I was at work and my colleagues in the HR department clocked that I wasn't right, and then they addressed me again, it was another outlet. And I really can't thank anyone enough who's been there for me, because it truly makes a difference. So I'll say this, because we all want to help. Our friends, our families, our loved ones, our colleagues, anyone we care for. And if they're going through a tough time, it's not yours to fix. If you can fix it, and you have that ability, that's great. But more often than not, you can't. But you can listen. But if you offer to listen, make sure you do. Because there's nothing worse than someone telling you they'll listen, and then they're not, and they don't, and that you shut it down, and then that noise gets louder again. So I knew I needed to change when I had two outbursts like that. It wasn't dramatic outbursts, it was just the floodgate opened on the conversations. And between everything that I'd gone through in my life with losing my mate Gary to suicide and losing friends to drugs when I was younger, and certain friends of mine going through addiction issues, and losing my dad and my brother-in-law, and my mum battling cancer, now Sean battling it, there was just a lot going on, and I felt like somewhere along I failed if I didn't fix it. And I knew I had to change. I had to change my attitude, I had to change who I was and how I stood about the noise. And there are many reasons why life can begin to feel loud, and none of them mean you're failing. None of them. My reasons for the noise will be different to yours and who you are listening, which will be different to your mum's reason for it being the noise being loud, or your dad's reason, your family, your friends, your loved ones, your co-workers. We all have different reasons for it being loud. But none of them are your failing. None of them. Sometimes it's sheer exhaustion. You've been pushing for too long without proper rest, and everything becomes harder to keep a hold of. Your systems and your nerves become more sensitive. Every word feels a little sharper. Every jab feels like a sucker punch. Everything feels heavier. The weight you're carrying feels heavier. Sometimes it's emotional build-up. Feelings we haven't acknowledged, they don't disappear. They stay with us. Quietly. Until they are asked to be felt. And they will ask to be felt. Because nothing goes away until you address it. Sometimes it's overstimulation. And we all do distracting ourselves, Constant notifications on social media, constant decisions to make, constant input at work or wherever life takes you, constant demands of your attention. And your mind never gets a moment to settle. It never gets a moment to just be. Sometimes it's disconnection from ourselves. When you live entirely in your head and entirely thinking about being another person, what would have happened if I just done this? Could I have helped my dad live? Could I have stopped this? Could I have done something to help mum? Could I have done something to help Sean? When you live inside internally and you're constantly trying to find ways to fix things that are not within your control, that's my example of the noise. Yours will be different, but when you're constantly living internally, your mind becomes the loudest voice you will ever hear. It's the only thing that grabs your attention. It's the only thing that grabs your notice. And everything else passes you by. You're disconnected from what's going on around you, what's going on in the moment. And sometimes it's simply that you've just been carrying for too long. Responsibilities, pressures of life, other people's needs, that expectation to just keep going, to just keep moving forward. And that's not the reality. You can't keep doing for everything for everyone without doing some things for yourself. Life often feels loudest when you've been holding everything together without enough support. And that goes for, external support. We all do need it sometimes. We need friends, we need family. Sometimes we need counselling or peer-to-peer support or other forms of therapy. Sometimes but sometimes all of these things in the end come from yourself, because it's yourself who will start that conversation with someone 9 times out of 10, a family member, a friend, to say, I'm struggling here, there's a lot going on, what do I do? It's yourself that might take yourself to a meditation class or go on YouTube or whatever streaming site and find a meditation to follow online, or to go to a yoga expedition, or go to a retreat of some kind, or to find these ways of looking at it all. But it's you who takes that initial step, and you need to love yourself enough to go for that support. Because I'm telling you this, every single one of you who's listening, you all deserve and are worthy of time for yourself, time to keep your head in check, time to invest in yourself, and to make yourself happy, to be happy and content. Investing in yourself does not mean you're ignoring others or ignoring another person's needs. That's not what investing in yourself is about. It's about being the best person you can be. And you can only do those things when you're rested, when you can't pour from an empty cup. At the base ground level, it is that basic. You cannot pour from an empty cup. And loudness shows us and has such big impact. You know, we often move into survival mode when things get overwhelming. We rush around, we react, we overthink, we shut down. You numb yourself. We disconnect. We lose patience, we lose clarity. You lose that connection with what you really need. And perhaps, most importantly, as I see it, we lose touch with that inner anchor that I was talking about. Not because that inner anchor isn't there, not because we've lost it forever, but because the noise is drowning it out. You're distracted. Life gets louder, the easier it is to be pulled outward out of everything around us. Grounding is what breaks us and brings us back inward. Back to breath, back to the body, back to the present moment, and back to ourselves. You can't make life perfectly quiet. There will be noise there. The goal of these words is not to try and tell you to make life perfectly quiet. That's not a reality. But what I do want you to do for yourselves is to create enough space to hear yourself again. And there are a few ways you can do it. There are many, many ways you can do it. But it's about investing in your time. Going back to episode 2, you all know what your still point is. Whether it is meditation, smashing a punch bag, playing rugby, doing martial arts, kicking a ball about, or journaling, or screaming in a field, or, we know what is our venting point, what is our pressure valve, for want of a better term, that gets to release that pressure, release that noise. And sometimes we can do quick things to help us. You can slow your breath. Breath work has been a huge thing for me. And I've touched upon it briefly. And in the coming days and weeks, I am going to do some bonus episodes which are purely breath work based. So they will be short exercise of breath work. So if you want to, you don't have to listen to the whole episode before we do a bit of breath work again. You can just pick it up. I've had some asks about that, and I wasn't sure if I was going to do it. So thank you to those people who have asked me to do some breath work exercises with them. You can slow your breath down. Breath work is a huge thing for me. It's made such a big impact. If I'm feeling overwhelmed, I just take myself away for a couple of minutes. Short breath work exercise, back to self, back to that. I found my still point again, back to the inner anchor, and I can crack on and move forward. Your breath is one of the quickest ways to get back to steadiness. It's not forced breathing, it's not perfect breathing, just slower breathing. Inhaling gently, exhale slowly. Let your body receive the message that it can soften. It doesn't have to be on edge, it doesn't have to be uptight. And speaking of your body, notice it. Your body is always in the present moment. Your thoughts can be in the past, the future, in fantasy, in fear, in stress, in scare mode, in flight or flight scenarios, but your body is here in this moment. So if you want to bring yourself back to self, simple things: scrunch your toes, feel the feet on the ground, feel your hands. I now these days, and it's not for everyone, but you will very rarely find me without some sort of crystal on me, whether it's on a bracelet, in my pocket, on a necklace. And the funny thing is, my mum always told me I used to do things as a kid with my hands. I would play with tags on my clothes and roll them up. I would hit the tables. Drum. I would rub my leg. I would feel my hands. So feel your hands, feel the support beneath you. Let yourself notice that you're here in the moment. And I know people say to live in the moment, but there's a big thing about it. Whatever happened in the past, whatever mistakes you made, because we all make them. I'm not seeing as someone who's perfect. I have monumentally cocked up in my life in a variety of ways. And I'm sure as life moves forward, I'll make another mistake. I will, because I'm human. We all are. But with that, you can't control what happened in the past. And this is one of the biggest lessons I had to learn. And I'm still learning a way of doing it. Forgive yourself. You don't have to carry that around with you. You don't. So while your thoughts can go to the past, know that's where it is. You're not that person that made that mistake anymore. Because if you were, you'd keep making it. You'd keep being that person. And let yourself be in the moment. Live as you are. Welcome the future. Allow yourself to change. We as humans are really bad at allowing people to change. You think the person you met would be like that for the rest of their lives. And no one is. We grow, we develop, we wise up, we learn. You know, to quote the Blackberry Smoke song, you know, we're all just learning as we go. And others are allowed to do that. And I had an experience, which I'm going to briefly touch upon. And I think this episode's going to be a little longer than I anticipated, but that's the way it's going to go. Where I got horrendously bullied as a kid for having epilepsy. And it was a big thing for me to go through. And I'll go into it more. But going to what I was talking about, you know, I got jumped every night, have them try and kick me into having a fit for their own amusement. And these were older lads. They were sort of, I was 9 and they were 13, you know, which is a big difference when you're that age. And there was 5 or 6 of them that would jump me every night after school. And needless to say, that left a mark and left a scar on me. But you think that these people are evil. In your head, I did. I had them in my head, they were still that way. And it was a big thing for me. It became a base level thingy, and you know, my base emotion became anger for a long time, which is something else I'm going to talk about. The anger and the side of things, because it's not a bad emotion. It can be negative, but all emotions can be. About 6 months ago, I was at an event, and one of the lads who used to bully me was there. I hadn't seen him in all that time. There was no, different high schools and nothing. Didn't think anything of it. But when I got introduced to the room, so to speak, he remembered my name and realised it was me. And he could have let it go, just being awkward, or not even acknowledged it. But he didn't. He came and found me, and he asked if he could have a word in private. I said, okay. So we took ourselves away, outside of the room, and he apologised. He said, this is probably way too late. It's 25 years later. Plus, you probably don't ever want to hear these words from me. But what I did as a young kid played on my mind, and has played on my mind so much. And I always told myself if I ever got the chance to apologise to you, that I would do it. And he gave me his apology. And that was a big thing for me. Because, yeah, it was a huge negative experience. It did impact me and how I grew up and believed. But It was all a learning experience for me that he did that, because he didn't have to. There was no reason for him to apologise for when you do, when you both in our 30s now, and he's apologising for what we did 25 years ago. No one's the same person now. There wasn't a kid. The fact that he did it actually meant a lot, and it helped me put certain things to bed. So allow people the chance to change. Allow them that chance. Because we as all individuals, we're not the same person we were as a kid, as a teenager, as a young adult, or even a year ago, 6 months ago, a month ago. People can change in a day. Because people change when they want to. It's not about being zen or finding a retreat. It's about getting rid of the loudness, getting clarity, and deciding what you want out of life and going with it and changing your actions accordingly. So always live in your body and in the moment, and allow people to have changed from their past, as hopefully they will have allowed you to change from yours. As I say, none of us are perfect. I'm certainly not. This podcast isn't about being perfect or zen. It's about being authentic and honest and true. Another way that you can arrive here is naming what's here. Sometimes if I get overwhelmed in my head, just acknowledge it. You don't have to judge your feeling or judge what's upsetting you. You don't have to try and fix it. Name it. Say it out loud if you need to. Because I promise you, saying it out loud does far more good than saying it internally. It makes it real. It grounds it. Say, I feel overwhelmed. I feel tired. I feel stretched. I feel claustrophobic. I feel full. I feel unsure. Naming what's true can create a space around it. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is lower the volume around us. Put the phone down. Turn the telly off. Step away from the screen. Give your mind a few moments without more sensory overload coming in. And you know what the biggest one I learned? Was letting things go. Not everything, just one thing at a time. One task, one expectation, one pressure you don't need to carry right now. And you know what? While you're trying to sort out what you've got in your hands, don't take anything else on board. It's fine to say, I'm sorry you're going through that, but right now I've really got a lot to deal with. It's fine to say. It's fine to not take on anyone else's stress. You can be sympathetic. You can have mutual conversations. You can be supportive, but you do not have to carry that weight. Sometimes that loudness, that noise, it softens the moment we stop trying to hold it all for ourselves. Ask yourself one question when it's getting overwhelming. Say, what do I need right now? Not what should I need. What not does everyone else need from me? Not what needs to happen. What do I need right now? At that specific point in time, what is it you need? That can bring you back to self in an instant. That can bring you back in the moment instantaneously. So let's take a moment right now, together. Let's soften that loudness with a bit of breath work, shall we? If it feels safe to do so, let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw loosen. You let your breath slow down to that steady pace, that safe pace. Take a slow breath in and let it fall out naturally. In again and out. Feel the weight of your body being supported. Feel the ground beneath you. Feel yourself just being in this moment. Continue that breath in. Feel your chest rise up as you breathe in. Hold it for a second. And slowly breathe back out. Keep that going. Slow breath in. And slow breath back out. Now while you're breathing, remember this. You don't need to solve everything right now. You don't need to clear every thought. You don't need to force yourself into calm. Just be here. Imagine all that noise around you as waves crashing on the shore. Thoughts rising, feelings moving, life happening. Beneath those waves, there is something steady. Let those waves crash out. Let that noise drift away. One more breath in. And slowly out. Beneath those waves, there is something steady. That quiet place within you that doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. Doesn't get pulled away. It's your inner anchor. Now bring your attention to that inner anchor. With each breath, let yourself settle a little more deeply into that steady place. Breathe in. Hold that breath. And exhale naturally. As you do exhale, let your mind focus on that inner anchor. If thoughts come, and they will, just let them pass. If feelings arise, let them be present. You don't need to chase them right now though. You don't need to fight them. Just keep returning to that steady place within you. One more slow breath in. And out. There you go, guys. Thank you for being with me here for this episode of My Inner Anchor. I hope this gave you a moment to pause, to breathe, to reconnect with yourself, even if only for a few minutes. If this episode spoke to you, feel free to follow, subscribe, or share with someone else who might need it. Remember, you don't need to fix everything. You don't need to carry it all alone. You only need to take one breath. Come back to your inner anchor. So thank you for joining me this week. I hope you find it well, and hope this episode finds you well. Until next time, thank you. On next week, we will be talking about grounding for all anxiety and overwhelm. Going a little bit more into those grounding techniques that I've previously spoken about. So until then, take a breath, take a moment, and find your inner anchor. Thank you for joining me.